Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Area Housing Authority of the County of Ventura. By a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the public housing program? Only one person, two people? Okay, so the reason why you're here today is because we're going to go over what the public housing program entails. And a lot of times applicants think that they're applying for Section 8, but we're going to go over all of that. We're going to clarify what the program is about and how, very briefly, how it differs from the Section 8 program, okay? So bear with me. In your letter, I stated that this could be a minimum of 2 hours, so I'm going to try my best to get you out of here on time. Alejandra is going to be here assisting me to go through everyone's paperwork because, as you can see, it's a relatively large group. Anna, who's currently downstairs, is another person who's going to do it. So 3 of us are going to try to get you out of here. So hopefully you have your paperwork more or less organized. If you didn't make copies of a specific document, don't worry about it. We'll take care of you. Just make sure you maybe set them aside so that we know which ones we're going to be taking down. All right, so here we go. So first of all, if this pointer works for me. Point it over there. Okay, I'm going to have to use this. Okay. So if you need to use the restroom, this is very important. If you need to use the restroom, you have to go back down the elevator and you would be making a left. And the restrooms are in the lobby. So if you need to go, you don't have to ask for permission, you can just go out. Please turn off your cell phones. Make sure they're either off or on silent. And also, if you have questions, I would encourage you to write them down on the note section that's inside your briefing packet. So if you open up this yellow folder, you have a preliminary briefing certification document. On the back, there's a section where you can write some notes and or questions. I'm sorry? Extra pen. Anybody else need something to write with? Okay. Okay. Another place where you can make notes or write down your questions is on the copy of the PowerPoint presentation. Every slide that I'm going to show you up here is in the briefing packet. So if you just want to follow along with the packet and make notes there, that's okay too. Okay. Very important, if there's someone here that requires a reasonable accommodation, please let one of the girls know privately. So maybe if you need any other type of accommodation, now's the time to let us know. Or if you need one later, you can let me know when we finish your interview. Okay, so here we go. The Violence Against Women Act is a law that was instituted to protect applicants who are victims of domestic violence. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that if I look at your file and I see a lot of police activity that's related to domestic violence, just exclusively domestic violence, I cannot deny you because that is, I have to investigate the situation further, and then you would have to provide documentation that shows that you have been a victim of domestic violence. that doesn't mean I cannot deny you for other reasons. It's just saying I cannot just exclusively deny you for anything that was related to a domestic dispute. In the packets, you should have more information about the law. So if you have any questions about it, please let me know. The HUD 50066 is the form you would complete. It's not required that you complete that form. You can provide other types of documentation. Okay? All VAWA cases are handled with strict confidentiality. What does that mean? That means that we do not put it in a common database, so no one in the office can go into our system and see anything that identifies you as a victim of domestic violence. They would physically have to open your file to find that kind of documentation. So the information is not readily accessible to everyone. So we're going to go over the admissions aspect of the public housing program. The information packet was mailed to you a few weeks ago. That's a packet that contains all the colorful forms that you had to complete and have ready for today. We send them to you in advance so you can formulate questions about items that you don't understand. So if you did formulate some questions, please save them for the end and I'll answer them when I meet with you. Your form should be complete and you should have all of the items that were on the checklist that was included with your briefing packet. That's birth certificates, social security cards, IDs, and the list goes on. It all depends on what your sources of income are. So I will have to review your self-certification, which was the gray form in your packet. That way I can see what your sources of income are. If you do not have all of your forms completed, especially the key ones that I need to run background checks and to do verifications, you're going to have to either come back or complete them before you leave. Otherwise, I cannot process your file. Those are, there's some key documents that I will talk about that I must have before you leave, or you're gonna have to come back. So if you already know offhand that you didn't complete everything in your packet and you don't think you can have it complete by the end of this meeting, I suggest you reschedule with me, and I don't want you to waste your time, okay? All adult members in the household, so when you applied and you listed yourself and other members in your family that are 18 years of age or older, that means they have to be here in this room at this time. Is there anyone here who listed family members who are 18 years of age and who are not here today? Because if I come and I look at your file and I don't see the person, then you're going to have to come back with that family member. Okay. ¿Usted no tiene en su lista algún miembro de la familia que tenga 18 años de edad que haya puesto en su solicitud y que no esté aquí? No? Okay. Okay. Then we're all good. I have a really good group of people today. Okay. Is this a briefing for the Section 8 program? The answer is no. So if you came here today thinking that you were applying for the Section 8 voucher program, that is not this program. So if you do not want to be a part of the public housing program and your intent was to apply for Section 8, then now's the time to leave. The Section 8 program has a separate waiting list. So we do not open simultaneously. We always open separate because it avoids confusion when you're applying. So the Section 8 program has a separate waiting list. You can be on both. There's not a problem with that. You can be on both so long as you apply when the waiting list is open. For example, at this time, our waiting list is closed to new applicants, and so is the Section 8 waiting list. So you wouldn't be able to apply for either program today. So what is public housing? Unlike Section 8, we have our own units. We have our own apartment complexes. We have 355 units of public housing. Some are for families and others are for elderly and disabled individuals. This program does not allow families to transfer from one jurisdiction to another. You can only transfer within our own public housing stock, meaning if you qualify for our program here in public housing, you cannot take the program to Oxnard. You cannot take the program to Los Angeles. You cannot take it to Port Hueneme or Santa Paula or any other city that has the public housing program. It's not transferable in that way. The Section 8 program, on the other hand, they have a portability feature that that allows you to do that, but that is not a feature of the public housing program. Okay? I've had people who come in and qualify, move into an apartment and give me a transfer request the next day to go to a different city, and you can't do that, unfortunately. So these are our sites. So in your letter, I identified the site for which you came up. So you're either here for the Rock Apartments in Ojai, Whispering Oaks Apartments in Ojai, the Ellis Terrace Apartments in Camarillo, the Leggett Court Apartments, Fury Gardens, or Florence Jansen Thousand Oaks, or the Tafoya Terrace Apartments in Moore Park. The differences, as identified here, is that some of these sites are strictly for seniors and disabled individuals, and the others are mixed population. So it could be families. It could be still an elderly household with multiple family members. So why are you here? You're here because you submitted a public housing application and you've reached the top of the waiting list. Now that doesn't mean that all of you here are number one for your site. You could be number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. You're just at the top. So the reason why we call a lot of you in is because not all of you are going to qualify. Once I'm done with my screening, you may be over income, or perhaps you have an eviction on your record, or maybe you don't pass the background check. I don't know that until I verify all of your information. So we call a lot of people to make sure that we have a few qualified families to occupy the upcoming available units. Does this mean that because you're here, you're guaranteed an apartment? And the answer is no. And I go back to what I said just a minute ago. You have to qualify, you have to meet all of the screening criteria, and we'll go over some of the things that we check. So what is next? The initial screening involves conducting a criminal background check, a credit check, and we also check debts owed. If you look at your packet, you completed two purple forms. One was for earned income verification and the other one was for debts owed. That is going to tell me if you've ever owed money to another housing authority, or if you're currently a participant of another program that conflicts with mine. You cannot be in the same program in multiple locations no matter where you live. You could be here and be living in public housing in a different state. We will be able to catch that because all of the verification is run by means of your social security number. Okay. I'm also going to check with your previous landlords to see what type of tenant you are. to see if you've had any issues with your previous landlords, or if you owe them any money. The credit check also shows me if you owe utilities. So if you owe gas, electric, to any utility company, those are things I'm looking for. Okay, and of course past evictions. That kind of goes in line with some of the landlord verification data that I look for. Okay. All documents and information will be verified. So what does that mean? I expect that you provide me with honest answers. If I go through your file and I notice inconsistencies, I'm going to investigate. And I may call you because there may be a reason for it, but we will investigate further. We're going to verify your employment to make sure that what you reported is what you make. Your benefit verification is if you're receiving cash aid, food stamps, Social Security. We're gonna look at that and check what your benefit status is. Your family composition. How many children do you have? Are you married? Are you single? Are you just in a relationship? It's not required that you're married to be on the program, by the way. Child support verification. We're gonna make sure that what you're reporting that you're receiving in child support coincides with what the county says. I know some of you may have a separate arrangement. If you have court documentation showing what you receive, that's fine too. And then of course I'm going to check your preferences. What does that mean? Some of you received points to outrank other applicants. For example, if you live in this county, or let me rephrase, in the AHA's jurisdiction, Camarillo, Ojai, Moore Park, those types of cities, you got points over other applicants who live in Oxnard, Port Hueneme. Those applicants are not part of our jurisdiction. So if I look at your paperwork and I gave you points and you live in Oxnard, then I'm going to put you back on the waiting list and I'm taking away those points. So that's what it means when I say I'm verifying preference verification. Okay. The only other preference in our program is veteran status. So if you reported you were a veteran, then you got 5 points. If I can't verify that, then those points are taken away and you're re-ranked on the waiting list. After we review the documents, we may have to request additional information. It just depends on what your situation is. It's on a case-by-case basis. We need you to ensure that you follow up with any request for additional information. We will always give you a deadline. And if you do not provide those documents by the deadline, then we could remove your application from the waiting list. So it's very important that you supply everything in a timely manner. If I don't have enough information from your landlords, I have the right to make a home visit. So I can come to your current home and look for how well you maintain your home, whether or not your utilities are on, if you have, it's just different items that we can look for in an inspection. Are you keeping up with just normal maintenance of your home? So we can come and see you at your home, and I just wanted to make sure that you knew that. The Area Housing Authority will update your file in accordance to the availability of units. So what that means is perhaps today I can screen all of you and a unit doesn't become available until 90 days later. If your information is older than 60 days, I have to check everything again, and you will be getting the same packet that you received in the mail. You will be receiving it again because I need you to complete it with the most current information. I'm also going to verify your employment again with your employer, not necessarily with your landlords, because that information doesn't change very much unless you moved. Then I would have to check with your new landlord, and those are items that you need to report to me within 10 days. And that is very important. If you change your phone number, if you change your address, those are items that you need to report. So in your yellow folder, I provided you with the blue form. This blue form is what you would submit if you have changes that you want to report. It could be changes in income, again, telephone numbers, a change in family composition. A change in family composition can really impact you because it could determine the unit size that you need. Okay, so those are items that you need to report within 10 days. If you do not, you're putting yourself at risk of me, for example, not being able to contact you because I no longer have your correct phone number, or risking that I get returned mail because I don't have your correct address. And we do have that rule: if we get returned mail, that's considered a failure to respond. And if you fail to respond to a request, you don't even have an opportunity to appeal our decision to remove you. Now, for any other reason that I deny you, maybe criminal background check or any other thing, you can appeal and you can explain your circumstances and why you think our decision may not exactly be the right decision. Okay, and the hearing is heard by a third-party hearing officer. So it's not anybody that works within the Area Housing Authority. It's a neutral party. Okay. How do I report changes? Like I said, they need to be reported within 10 days. This form is also available on our website. So I gave you a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. That's our website. You click on Public Housing and select Forms. And the only form that should be there is the applicant update. And you can download it and drop it off with the receptionist or mail it in. And this is what they look like. Now there's two. If you qualify for the program and you become a tenant, you will complete a tenant update form. It looks almost the same. There's a few differences. And then make sure you're using the correct one, which is the one that says applicant, because at this stage, you're still an applicant. How long do I have to wait for an apartment? That is very difficult to know. We're screening you, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's an available unit at this time. What types of things can affect that? Well, we give priority to people who need a transfer. So if I have someone on my transfer list for the site that you're eligible for, I have to transfer that person first. So if I fill the unit with a transfer, then there's no longer an available unit. It's until one becomes available, and then I go into my applicant pool. You must abide by all eligibility requirements while you wait for the unit. So you're gonna get a letter from me that says, hey, congratulations, you made it through the first phase. That doesn't mean I can't deny you still for not complying with any other request. It's very important that you respond. We made this process a little bit easier now, actually. Before, every 60 days you would get that fun packet from us. And we eliminated that requirement because it was very burdensome, and we understand that it's a lot of paperwork. So what we did now is only if there's something coming up, we will send you the documents to complete again, and we will verify the information again. It was not only just burdensome for you, but it was also becoming burdensome for some employers to complete the same form every 60 days. 60 days goes by really fast. So make sure you comply. So what would you have to do as a tenant? The big disclaimer right here, this is not everything that you need to abide by. Once you become a tenant, you will sign what we call a residential lease agreement, and that'll go more in depth as to what you have to do to stay on the program. But here are some things. We do recommend, but do not require, that you obtain renter's insurance. And the reason for that is if there's a leak in your apartment and your belongings become damaged, you can cover those expenses through your renter's insurance, especially if it's a leak that's caused if you were negligent and didn't report any maintenance, because we won't cover items that were damaged due to negligence. So I would take a moment to look into different options for renter's insurance. But again, it's a recommendation, but it is not required. All of our public housing sites are smoke-free. You cannot smoke in your unit. You cannot smoke in the parking lot. You cannot smoke anywhere on the premises within 25 feet of our property. There's other city ordinances that you need to be mindful of, because some of them don't allow you to smoke in certain areas in the city. Again, you will receive more information about this. What about marijuana? That's a very common question nowadays, now that recreational marijuana was legalized in some way in the state of California. We are a federally funded program. Therefore, federal rules apply. So even though the state of California has approved recreational use of marijuana, you cannot smoke it on our premises. You cannot possess it on our premises. It cannot be in your unit. It cannot be in your car in our parking lot, because all federal requirements apply. As far as the federal government is concerned, marijuana is still a Schedule 1 drug, and it's illegal. But I have a medical marijuana card. I can use it. No, you cannot. Not in public housing. So if that's something that you have to use and there's no way around it, this is not the program for you. Pets, companion, and service animals. All animals, whether they're pets or companion animals or service animals, they all must be registered with the Area Housing Authority before you move them in. So if that's something that you know offhand, maybe that's something you can tell us about at this stage, so that we're prepared to give you the appropriate paperwork for your pet. The registration includes documentation from a licensed veterinarian that shows that they've received all their inoculations that are required by the state or local law. There's different requirements for each city. The city of Moore Park does not have the same requirements as the city of Thousand Oaks, and it does not have the same requirements as the city of Ojai, and so on and so forth. So we will provide you with each local ordinance, but it's really your responsibility to check with the city in which you're moving to see what other requirements they have. And then, of course, licensing requirements vary by city. There's some cities that require that you license your cats, and there's others that do not. They only require it for dogs. So When you're a tenant, the person that you report your income changes to is not me. It's not going to be the eligibility specialist, which you will get to meet later. Her name is Evelyn. And but when you're a tenant, you report it to your site manager. There's a site manager assigned to each of your sites. And you will be provided with their names at the time when you arrive to sign your residential lease agreement. So what can you provide your site manager? Pretty much the same items that you would be providing me today. For employment, we require 4 to 6 pay stubs so that we can, especially if your hours vary, having more than one pay stub helps. That way we can account for the highs and the lows of your income. Why is that important? Because we project your income for the entire year. So we do not say, oh, well, this month you're making this much. You know, we project it for the entire year. If you're able to bring us 4 to 6 pay stubs, and one week you work 23 hours and the next you work 40, and then you work 50 and maybe 15, we'll take the average of those hours and project your income for the entire year. So it's very important. Your original notice of action from the Human Services Agency, that'll show us how much cash aid you're receiving. We will verify that the information is still the same. Pension statements, IRA statements, all of these documents that you present to me today have to be original. I cannot accept copies because I have to make sure that there were no alterations made to the document. It's okay if you brought both. If you brought me the original and you brought me the copy, that's fine. I'll look at them both, but I must see the original, otherwise I cannot accept it. If you brought me an illegible copy, I cannot accept it either. They have to be legible. They cannot be photocopies. They have to be complete, and it cannot be unofficial documents. It has to be official documents. Some examples of family compositions, and you could provide birth certificate, proof of current address. That's more for, say someone gets married and they want to move into the apartment. We need everything that we would ask you at eligibility, we will ask of them if they're moving in once you've already moved in. And they have to meet all of the eligibility criteria in order to make that move as well. Again, no illegible printouts, no incomplete information, no photocopies of legal documents, etc. It is your responsibility to report changes in income. We have 355 other households to worry about. We cannot, continue to remind you that you need to report your income. It is a requirement of the program. It is required that you report all changes in family composition. That does not mean you can move in someone and tell us later. You need to tell us that you plan on moving somebody in. We will screen them and we will let you know whether or not they can move in. If we find out that someone's moved in and we catch it and we investigate it, that's considered program fraud, especially if that person is contributing income to your household. This program also requires that you report things that affect your community service status, and I'll talk about community service in shortly. The program also requires that every single year you provide us with information regarding your income and family composition. So every single year you will do basically what you're doing today. You will present your site manager with all of your pay stubs and all income sources, and we will verify it and we will run background checks. It is very important that you keep your units clean once you moved in, because we do conduct annual inspections for housekeeping, for damage to the unit, and for any other issues that need to be repaired. And all maintenance issues need to be reported on a timely basis. A lot of people hesitate to report it because they assume that every maintenance issue that is reported is going to end in a tenant charge. That's not necessarily the case. It just depends on what it is. There's some equipment that's just normal wear and tear, but if it's determined that it's negligence on behalf of the tenant, then it's considered a tenant charge. If you're negligent, that may become a tenant charge. If there's been something leaking from your sink or leaking in the bathroom for a long period of time, a plumber can tell. And so it is very important that you always report these issues so that they're addressed in a timely manner. And of course, the big one and the most important one is you need to pay your rent on time. I'm going to go over some of that in greater detail. Your annual re-examinations, and I know this has been an issue before for other people, because they're like, well, you know, it hasn't been a full year. The AHA, our agency, will provide you with a letter letting you know that your re-examination is coming up. We can start that anywhere between 90 to 120 days prior to your anniversary. And it's your anniversary month, not your anniversary date, your anniversary month. So your new rent, if there's any changes, will become effective on the first day of the month in which you moved in the prior year. Okay? And it doesn't matter if you moved in on the 1st or the 28th. It'll still be the first day of the month in which you moved in. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm seeing some blank faces. I want to make sure you're understanding. And again, we will be going over this information again with you later. Compliance with all annual re-examinations. This is an essential component of this program. If you do not comply with your annual re-examinations, you are going to have problems. It is a requirement for continued occupancy. Interim re-examinations depend on the change that you're reporting. The amount of income that you report, or if you switch jobs, that will be evaluated, and we will let you know whether or not that's going to affect your rent up or down. So your income does drive the amount of rent that you pay on a monthly basis. So if your income goes up, just depending on the situation, it will go up. If your income goes down, then we will decrease your rent. We just have to verify all of that information. Okay. Who do I call when I need repairs? Your site manager. Your site manager will always be your first point of contact. Now, if your site manager is not communicating with you, that's when I come into the picture. But otherwise, they're the ones in charge of coordinating all of the maintenance issues. Now, obviously, we're not there every day at all hours of the day. So we have an emergency line that you can call in case of an emergency. It's not to report that you locked yourself out of your apartment. You know, if you do report that, and it's after hours, they usually charge a pretty big fee. What we usually recommend is that you find trustworthy neighbors or a trustworthy family member that can keep a copy of your key. So let's see. Community service. So sometimes this is a deal breaker for some applicants. If you do not work if you are not disabled, if you do not go to school, if you do not meet any of the criteria that would make you exempt, you have to do community service, or you may participate in self-sufficiency activities. A self-sufficiency activity is job training. It could be resume writing workshops. We will give you credit for those types of things. So who is exempt? If you're 62 years of age or older, you're exempt. If you're a person with disabilities and I can verify that and you meet the requirements for that program, you're exempt. If you're employed, you're exempt unless you lose your job. If you lose your job and you don't seek other employment and you can't prove that you're actively seeking employment, you must perform community service, and I'll go over how many hours in a second. Persons who are enrolled in school are exempt because that's considered a self-sufficiency activity. Okay? Who is not exempt? Household members who are 18 years of age or older who do not meet this criteria. Okay, so this only affects individuals who are 18 years of age or older. Here's some examples of things you can do. You can volunteer, at your child's school with their teacher, at your church, at the library, at animal shelters, food share. I mean, I've heard judges that say they have community service at the courthouse, because I have gone to court with individuals who don't meet that community service requirement, and they say there's plenty of opportunities here. So, self-sufficiency activities, attending training classes, attending school, participating in parenting workshops, attending financial literacy courses, so how to budget, how to increase your credit score, all of those activities count towards that requirement. So how many do you have to do? 8 per month, and a total of 96 hours per year. It's not a lot. Before, you couldn't skip a month. You had to do exactly 8 hours per month. But HUD has recently become a little more lenient with that requirement, and you can actually do 16 or 32 or all of them in 1 month if you wanted to. So can you complete 8 hours in a month, more than 8 hours in a month? Of course you can. And what happens if you do not comply? If you do not comply, you have to sign an agreement with me that says, I'm going to make those hours up the next year, and I'm going to also comply with my requirement for this year. And when I'm talking about a year, I'm talking about your recertification year. So if you move in this month, we're in May, by next May, and you have to do community service, your 96 hours are due in May. Okay? Now, if you don't complete them by May, you have to sign a contract with me that says, I'm going to make up my 96 hours for this period, and I'm also going to do my 96 hours for next May. If you don't, number one, if you do not sign the agreement with me, that's an automatic non-renewal of your lease. If you do not move out by your anniversary date, then I can file an unlawful detainer against you. If you comply, then you're okay. You only have one makeup period. That's the only thing that HUD allows. You only have one opportunity to make up the hours. So don't let them accumulate if you fall into that category. The entire policy is in your packet. It's the yellow form. So when you go home, I encourage you to read it and go over the policy in detail. Okay? rent is due on the 1st of each month. We have a grace period up to the 5th, but the due date, and this is something that some people get confused about, the due date is the 1st, not the 5th. It is due on the 1st. After the 5th day of the month, you're late. So where do you make your rent payments? You can make them here, personally, or you can send them in the mail. If you come here, you may request a receipt. And the finance department is the one that handles your rent. I don't handle your rent. Your site manager does not handle your rent. So you cannot turn in your rent at your site. You have to come here or you have to mail it. Okay? If you bounce a check, you will be put on a do not accept list for 1 year the first time. If you get a non-sufficient funds notice a second time, you are banned from providing checks for the rest of your tenancy. So it's very important that you make sure that your accounts balance. We do not charge late fees. That was really becoming burdensome for individuals who were constantly late. They couldn't catch up anymore. It was just causing a big problem, and that's not really the purpose of our program. We don't want to, burden everybody with more expenses. So we do not charge late fees, but we do enforce our for late rent in a 12-month period policy. So it's not a January to December thing. It's an any 12-month period. We count backwards. From the moment you're late, we count to see how many times you've been late in the past 12-month period from the date that you get your late rent notice. So here's an example. If you were late in October of 2016, I'm going to count backwards. And I'm going to see that you were late in April, and that you were late in February, and actually the last late in this example is in January of 2017. So I'm going to count backwards, and I'll see you're late in October, you're late in April, and you're late in February. It doesn't matter how old they are. If they're within this 12-month period, it counts against you. So this pattern of late rents will warrant a 60-day notice of termination of tenancy, and you will no longer be a tenant. Here's another example. This is more of a consecutive example. So if you're late in February, I'm going to count backwards to January, December, and November, and this also warrants a 60-day notice of termination of tenancy. So it's very important that if you're experiencing a hardship, life happens. We know that. Sometimes you have medical issues and you were in the hospital and you couldn't come and pay your rent. We understand, but you need to let us know. It's just the communication factor that comes into play. It's easier for you to let us know in advance because then we're anticipating it. Oh, Mrs. Smith, was just in the hospital. She said she would make her rent payment on such and such a date. So that way we know ahead of time, and then we don't have to burden you with bringing us copies of hospital bills or anything like that. We also have annual UPCS inspections, which I touched on briefly. These are mandatory. You can't say, oh, well, I don't want you to come into my apartment to conduct this inspection. It's mandatory. It's a HUD requirement. I don't like to do it, but we have to do it. And I know the program is a little invasive as far as your privacy. We look at everything, all of your income, all of your bank statements, and I understand it gets a little uncomfortable sometimes. And then we have to come into your apartment and look at all of your stuff. I like to inform everybody of that, because if you're not comfortable with that, this is not a program that you want to be in, because this is something we have to do for the health and safety of not just your family, but your surrounding neighbors. Okay? So it's annual, and all tenants always receive advanced notice. Always. That way you can prepare and you can advise us of something that maybe you notice is not working, so we can fix it before the inspection, things like that. The inspector, which is not a housing authority inspector, it is not anybody in this office, it's an outside inspector who comes in. They check for housekeeping standards, smoke detectors, damage to the unit, egress and ingress. That means that we don't have furniture against doors that are an exit, that you don't have furniture that goes above the windowsill that's blocking your window. There has to be access to at least one window in each bedroom in case of an emergency. So where can I find housekeeping guidance? It will be in your residential lease agreement. Very detailed. And I promise you, I think this is the last part of my presentation, and it's very important. It's program abuse. And we're getting close. So is it worth it? When you received your briefing packets, you received a HUD form that talks about fraud. Everybody is required to sign it because it tells you what types of things are considered fraud. If you make a false statement on the documents that you're providing to me today with the intent to make you qualify for a program that you wouldn't otherwise be qualified for, that's fraud. If you conceal information from me and I later find it during my screening, that's fraud, and I will remove you from the waiting list. So if you tell me, I don't have a bank account, and I later find out that you do, I can remove you from the waiting list for concealing information that I requested. If you say, oh, the father of my children is not going to live with me, it's just me and my kids, and I later find out that he moved in with you, that's fraud. So there's just a lot of things that you need to be careful with. And do people do it? Yes, they do. And it's only a matter of time before we catch it. What is considered a guest? When you're a tenant, if someone's going to stay with you for more than 3 days, you need to let your site manager know, hey, my grandmother's in from out of town. She's visiting. She's going to be here for more than 3 days. I'm just letting you know, I'm giving you a heads up so that my neighbors don't start to complain. A guest cannot stay for more than 14 days, although there are circumstances where we can make exceptions. For example, I had a family whose relative came in from out of town, and then that person had a heart attack and couldn't travel anymore. We're not going to say no. Obviously, there are circumstances in life that we have to take into consideration. If the person stays in the unit beyond the allowable time and we don't know about it and we investigate it and we can prove it, that means you have an unauthorized occupant, and that could lead to an eviction or fraud prosecution. And the penalties for program abuse are, we have the discretion to impose some of these things. We can ask you to repay, or if the situation is to the extent where even a repayment doesn't sound reasonable, then we will terminate. If, for example, someone in your family commits a crime and we run a background check and you didn't tell us, that could put you at risk of losing your tenancy because of the one family member, because you are responsible for everything that your family members do, your guests, unfortunately, you're responsible for all of that. So if your guest is smoking out in the parking lot, I'm going to come talk to you. I have nothing to do with your guest. I'm going to come and talk to you, and I'm going to let you know that your guest is smoking, and guess who's going to receive the violation? Not your guest. It's going to be you. So if there's a family member that's in your household that committed a crime, we would have to go through a process to remove that person, or the entire household has to go. So those are some of the things. So what it's saying here is, if there's just a family member that's just not complying, but you're good at everything, you've been in compliance, it's just this one person just can't get their act together, we can work on that. It's all on a case-by-case basis. So bottom line is, don't lie. Be truthful. If you have questions or doubts as to whether or not you should provide a certain information, it's better to ask than not to provide it. We're here to help you. I'm here to answer your questions. I do want to advise you that they're not experts in the public housing program. They're just here to help me initially screen. If there's a question, you have to ask me. So for right now, by a raise of hands, I would like to know who completed all of their paperwork.